Welcome. It has just gone 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday the 11th of December, and you are watching episode 115 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode is Ken Jury, a former investigative journalist. After completing a cabinet maker's apprenticeship, Ken went on to study journalism in marine and aquatic ecology. He was employed writing for the Adelaide Advertiser and had a Channel 7 weekly spot until about 1975. He has also hosted his own radio show with top commercial South Australian radio station 5DN, where he produced and presented the program Marine Watch every Saturday morning for about 23 years. In 1983, he joined South Australian Fisheries as a journalist, where he produced its global South Australian fishing magazine, which attracted readers from across the world. Ken routinely interviewed many of the fishery scientists for both the magazine and his radio show. In 2009, Ken and his wife moved to Galway on the South Australian coast, where he joined the local community radio station 5EFM, where he went on to produce some 70 two-hour episodes of Counterbalance with guests from across Australia. With Galway being near the mouth of the Murray River, Ken became acutely aware of the issues facing the Lower Murray, Lower Lakes and Coorong. Already familiar with many of the scientists and officials engaged in the Murray-Darling Basin Commission, Ken was soon putting his investigative journalism to good use. He has authored many papers and submissions on the myriad of issues facing the landowners, communities, and others businesses on the Murray-Darling Basin, the irrigators, as well as the residents and communities and business of the Lower Lakes and Coorong. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much, Bill. Much appreciated, and to your listeners and viewers, thank you.
Well, if you could give us a bit of background, although I've made the introduction, but going from a cabinet maker to investigative to journalism, and then you or your associate or your concentration on the environmental, especially of the marine and rivers environment. Can you give us a bit of an expose of what led you up to this point, and especially the last 12, 15 years within your new community?
Well, it all started off for me when I was a young man. We lived and I was raised in Mount Barker, which is in the Adelaide Hills. And of course, the Depression was well on, and my dad had to get off the farm and get some work elsewhere. He finished up with the railways, and he did very well with them, and they shifted him down to the suburbs for a while to fix up a few things down there. He had to go to the outer harbour for a job, and for some reason, while he was there, he did a bit of fishing off the wharf. I couldn't believe this, but he came home with a mulloway about 1 metre long, and that fish caught my attention for the rest of my life. And I thought, if I can go fishing and catch fish like that, that's going to suit me. So that's how it all started. It started with a fisheries background, if you like, and it grew. It grew to the point with my radio show. It also attracted the Department of Fisheries in South Australia. The Minister and the director took me to lunch one day, and I'd already interviewed their scientists several times over on my show. And I thought, oh, they're just taking me to lunch to thank me. But it wasn't that at all. They said we'd lost our journalist. And they said, you're next on the list. And I said, oh, really? So we had to crack a deal, because I wasn't going to give up all my media work that I'd worked so hard for. And so they gave in, and they said, we'll bend the rules. And they did. And So I was with the fisheries for 12 years until they actually closed the agency down in South Australia, and they split the scientists up down to a place called West Beach into a new facility. The other persons in the department were doubled up in primary industries and resources in South Australia, and that's still as it stands today. I was with them for 12 years, and I thought, no, I'm just about ready to stop. This was in about 1992. So I did stop, and I decided then that I was going to do some work. I had one of my colleagues in the government who worked for Department of Environment and Heritage. He was one of their top people, and he approached me. He said, "Ken, there's a drought on the way." And I said, "Yeah, it's funny. I had a bit of a feeling about that too, although not much to go on." But he said, "Well, let's you and I get together. You, the journalist, and me with my background in the lower lakes areas and so on." So that's what happened. And we got it together. This gentleman now is well retired, but still very interested. And so I've kept up this work and will continue to do so for a while yet. So that's about where it is, if you like.
Well, it's not just the lower lakes that come into play with the environment. We have the whole catchment area of the Murray-Darling Basin feeding into the lower Murray and the lower lakes. And history has shown us, and this is one of the weird things about the government. They seem to only have a attention span of a couple of years, sort of thing, and they take no notice of past events or in regards to the natural environment. There was plenty of times when the Murray basically didn't flow, and the fact that we've got continuous flow is our making by putting in huge dams and also the feed in from the snowies and that. So what we've got now is a natural circumstance almost where we can almost supply year-round flow in the Murray, which was never the case in the past. It was flood seasons and then droughts and then huge floods that overflowed the banks and sated some of the environment that needed to have that overflow on occasions, but it certainly doesn't need the overflow on a yearly basis. So do you think the problem is a little bit that the politicians either don't want to know or don't know the history, enough history of the Murray-Darling and the lower Murray to make fair judgments, and the people they rely on to give them information may not have the best interest of everyone on the river and the regional centres at heart?
Well, that's a very good point, Bill, and no doubt about it, you're close to the mark. It's sickening to think that politicians can get away with this. Here again, we're seeing it live, where politicians are just marching in and taking water from our growers. They're putting our food security in peril again. They've done it before and they're going to do it again, because that's exactly what's going to happen. We lost a lot of growers during the millennium drought, and that was a cruel period for a lot of people. Certainly we had no water down here, not that we could talk about. The lower lakes were only about a quarter of their size, and all up when they're full, they hold they stretch, I should say, 840 square kilometres. It's the biggest lake system in Australia. But having said that, we're still fighting for water. The politicians seem to think that the lone tree on a hill with a shrub alongside of it hasn't had water for a while. We better switch the water over and somehow get the water up there. That's their theory. And yet they don't care about food security at all. They're certainly not caring too much about the growers and the irrigators. But these people have put their heart and soul into growing our food. This country relies on it heavily, and they're taking it away. And so we're facing another massive dilemma with our water and the way it's used. And, you know, I begged the minister when she got in, Minister Bureaucracy, I even wrote to her, and I even offered a little bit of time for a response, knowing full well that she was new to the job. Never get a response, never. And so I wrote her again, and it was a little bit more stern this time, and I said how disappointed I was in her. She handed that letter to a young person with the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, and I got a one-page response. It was the most Mickey Mouse response I've ever received. Now, I have a friend in Sydney who, Peter Millington. Peter Millington was the former Murray-Darling Basin Commissioner, and he was revered for his knowledge of rivers and stuff. He was in that position for 9 years until he was moved by parliamentary changes. And this particular gentleman rang me one day and he said, he said, I've got a copy of your Better Way document in my hand. And I said, well, I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you very much for letting me know. He said, what I need to do is to have your permission to use it. I want to put part of it into a book. And I said, well, then we're going to talk copyright because I need to know who I'm talking to. He said, well, yes, I'm Peter Millington. And of course, the penny dropped with me. I said, Peter, you're the former Murray-Darling Basin Commissioner who did all that wonderful work with our rivers with a very small team, nothing like what we're paying for today. He said, you're absolutely right. He said, Ken, I congratulate you on your Better Way document. He said, that's a winner. That solution is the only one that's been written up as such across the whole basin. You can imagine I felt pretty thrilled about that. It's interesting to know that that document has attracted a lot of attention. And so far, there was 2,009 copies spread somewhere across the basin. That'll give you some idea. So Peter Millington has got a small team of people. I'm now part of that. Getting this book ready, we've got to the point where it's getting pretty close to putting it together, and we hope early in the new year we can announce the fact that it's going to be available right throughout the basin. It will cover most of the basin and with no punches pulled. We'll tell about the woes and goodness knows what else. So I think any people that have got questions on the River Murray and the lower or the whole system, if you like, the Murray-Darling Basin system, they'll be able to find some answers there.
I think one of the interesting things is that the system is so complex, and yet the single solution that government can come up with is just flush more water down the system. Now, yeah. I know nothing about rivers, or but as much as I know is bloody put my head into a piece of electronic equipment and try to fix it. That's my background and skill. But as an observer, standing on the banks of a river, it makes no difference to the surrounding environment to me if that river's flowing below the bank level at half level, quarter level, or 3/4 level. None of that water is really transferring to the local environment unless we pump it out. So I can't see how they have this rationale that we send more water down the river, that it fixes the environment of the surrounds of the river. It's unless you take water out and put it on the land, it does nothing. It just flows past. So, am I wrong in my assessment of that? That it doesn't matter how much you flow down to basically the 2,000 kilometre length of the river down to the lower river, that water flowing past does nothing for the local environment.
Well, you know, the environment keeps coming into the question. And the trouble is we got too many with that word, too many people. And they've clubbed together. Whether they're a senator or a couple of senators, or whether they're a CEO of a department, they're all the same. I've actually, about 4 years ago now, just before the virus hit, anyway, to give you a better idea of time, I put together a meeting in Victor Harbor. That's one of the major city towns in my region. And the hotel there had a wonderful room with a big table, a big long table, ideal for a meeting of irrigators. I managed to get 11 irrigators from 4 basin states, and I got 7 people from the department. Some of those people were directors, and I might add, one director at, I'm not going to name, at the end of the mission, whispered in my ear and in one other person's ear that what we were talking about was right. I was rather pleased about that, but it never went any further. Now, the thing is that we can't understand this state government ourselves. We know that they're under a heck of a lot of pressure at the moment with all sorts of reasons, and there are many of them. And we certainly know a lot about what they're worried about. It comes about quite easily if you're in the right camp. But the fact is that first of all, we don't have any gauges down this end of the river. The last gauges to measure the river as it comes down our way is that it's 270 kilometres up at Blanchetown. That's their measuring stick. That SA Water seem to think they've got some measurement down here, but believe me, when you open the gates of the barrages and then shut them again, and then you don't open all at once at one time or another, and so on, there's no way to really gauge it. And so as a result of that, the water coming down past where I live, the water out in front of my home is only 50 metres away. We never know where that water is going to. We don't know whether it's just earmarked to put in the Murray mouth and clear it, and get the sand out of there, or the sand and silt, or is it for the Coorong? And of course, the Coorong's in trouble at the moment, especially the Southern Lagoon. That's been badly assessed with various sorts of muck that's been dragged in from the southeast drainage, where the state government here decided some few years ago to turn 1 or 2 of those drains around back to the Coorong, like it should have been. Well, they did that, but they hadn't thought about the fact that the paddocks that water passed over had been there and been used for nearly 100 years or more. And as a consequence, when the water hit it, when it really hit it, it dragged everything you can imagine into the lower lakes, into the Coorong, into the southern lagoon of the Coorong. So that's the first thing we look at. Then we look at the northern lagoon of the Coorong, and of course that has a marvellous commercial fishery, and that is an estuary, and that's what the lower lakes should be, or were. They were before the barrages were built. The lower lakes had a fishery of some 40 odd commercial fishermen. Quite a few of them, at least half, only ever fished the big lake, Lake Alexandrina. And this is before the barrages, so you can imagine it, with the ocean coming in and then going out, and then of course any flood water coming down, the Murray and so on. So what they did, one family of fishermen in particular, I was introduced to when I first moved to Gore, and they handed over all sorts of historic things for me, which made it a lot easier. But they fished at the top end of Lake Alexandrina. It's a huge lake. When you get on that big lake and you stand on one side, you can't see the other. That's how big it is. And they fish for Murray cod and for mulloway. And I can imagine what you're thinking in your mind right now. Well, hang on, how can you do that? That's freshwater fish and it's estuarine fish. Well, you're quite right. But that water coming into the lakes was stratified. It's coming in from the ocean and it gets into the lower lakes, of course, because there's nothing to stop them. And in the meantime, the River Murray is emptying a little bit too. So that's where you get the stratification. So what the fishermen did, each fisherman had 2 people on board their boat, each boat, and each one of them had a bottle with a cork in it to drop down the bottom. The one I talked to, he had an old tomahawk head tied to this so he could get his bottle down to the bottom. He'd pull the cork out and with the cord from the boat, and then they'd lift the bottle up, and of course if it tasted like just fresh, then they're in fresh water right then. So they put out the nets for Murray cod. They'd only move a few hundred metres, and then they do the same thing again. And this time, if it was estuarine, they'd put out set nets for mulloway. And so, as a consequence, they'd catch mulloway and Murray cod. And they were hugely successful. The whole area was so amazingly full of Murray cod and more so with mulloway. There was one period when they were building the Goolwa barrage. It was the last barrage to be built and the closest one to Goolwa. And on the outside of what they put, where they put the foundation down, on the outside of the foundation, they had to put in a cofferdam to get the last bit of ocean water away so they can finish their cementing or their concreting. And what happened is that when they did that, they were just closing the cofferdam off completely, and a huge school of mulloway went straight through the hole. There were mulloway from one end of the barrage to the other end. They were trapped in there, in their thousands, and we do have photos of them, and I can always send those over if you want to have a look at them. But the fact was that the builders of the barrage decided that the people that were working on the barrage could take time out and take some fish home and have the fun of it, and the benefit of it, I guess. And so that was one of the things that happened down here. And there are other fishermen that only ever fished the Coorong before the barrages. They were quite happy to do that. And it was the same down here in Goolwa. I mean, out front of us, we're about 3 kilometres, I think it is, from the Goolwa barrage, might be a fraction more. And from there, from the inside of the barrage to where I am, is around about 3 kilometres, 3 or 4 kilometres. And I actually live on the edge of the Goolwa channel, which is about a half a kilometre wide, roughly. And just downstream a bit from the Torrens, from the Highmarsh Island Bridge, it forms a big lake that finishes up against the Goolwa barrage, and a lot of the old commercial fishermen fish down there. Of course, once the barrages were completed, the mulloway couldn't get in. It stopped it completely. And those fish that were left caught up with the cofferdams were picked up. It actually upset the markets in both Victoria and South Australia. There were so many fish. Today, we still get fish down here. The mulloway in the upper lagoon are caught there, and as other species are. But it's interesting to know the Victorian fisheries people a few years ago did some tagging exercises and found that the mulloway coming from the east towards the Murray mouth always went into the Glenelg River in Victoria, and part of that river actually comes into South Australia too, but they came into Victorian part. And we found out, or the Victorian fisheries found out, that the fish were in there to rest and to feed only. And then they followed those fish. Some of them were tagged, of course, and they could follow them right into the Goolwa Channel on the outside of the barrage, of course. And lo and behold, they couldn't get past the barrages. They'd come right up to the barrages and nose them, these big mulloway. And then I can imagine a mulloway, what he's saying, or if he could say. But the fact was that some went out the mouth again, and others went into the other lagoon, of course, and were either caught or managed to escape and got out to eventually go east again. So it's a place down here that has so many opportunities. The fishery, if those barrages weren't there, this fishery would have been one of the top ones in Australia. There's no doubt about it. The results and the figures of those results are just enormous. And so that's where we sit. There's a lot more to all of this, though, Bill. And one of the biggest things is the water issue. As I said, we don't know how much water's coming down here half the time. More often than not, we don't know who sent it, how much it is, where it's destined for, and it's a terrible situation. The department puts some sort of effort into it, but it's not the sort of effort that where we're going to get a good response. And that's
Just before we move on,
disappointing.
Prior to the barrages, well, the fishermen and the communities would have had to deal with the tidal movements into the lower lakes. So, and the barrages, what they did when the barrages came there, it sort of set the level to lakes to a set level. So you're talking to the past fishermen from the past. How did they deal with the tidal changes? Because obviously some tides would be fairly high and you'd be able to get your boats into the lake, and then other times if the tide was right out, was that a problem? What was the history with the fishermen in regards to that era?
There was never a problem. Most of them had what they call 30-foot boats, very, very nice vessels. You can still see some of them today. They've kept them nicely down here, and they've been sold on, of course, and others have bought them. They're a magnificent boat, ideal for what they were doing. It was never a problem because the lower lakes are so big, and of course the entry point in the channel, in fact, the one I talk about and live just in front of, is when the ocean comes in. I mean, when it rushes in, of course, at the beginning of when it's rushing in, it's got quite, or can have quite a speed up. But by the time it comes right up and gets into the lower lakes, it's slowed right down. In fact, it's interesting that subject, because we talked about stratification earlier, and the fact is that that water stratification gradually mixes, of course, to become estuarine, and that takes time, and and it keeps doing it over and over again. The next tide will come in, and a little bit will be stuck in there, and it'll get mixed up with the river water. So it's just that nature at its best. Yeah.
Just to give the viewers a bit of an overview of the lower lakes and what we're talking about, and then maybe we can move on to other sources of water inflow to the lower lakes from basically all the way from the Mount Gambier area and Mount Lofty area that used to, well, some of it still flows and some of it doesn't flow, but used to come in through what were wetlands from those areas pre-colonial times, and even until we started to really get into the agriculture and draining land. So if we just show some maps of where we're talking about.
Well, surely, but there's not much coming in from the southeast.
Yep. This is the general area of South Australia we're talking about.
That's true.
in the past, before there was a lot of agriculture put in and drainage and that, there would have been general wetlands to both, to the east of the lakes, but all those wetlands are gone. So, and they also would have had seepage into the Coorong. But the drainage systems that have been put in there in the last 140 odd years have made a difference to how that water flows. And now there's even complaints that some of the drainage water that is going out into the ocean is of such a volume, the fresh water, that actually kills seagrass and that. And so we've done a lot in regards to changing the environments completely surrounding the lower lakes. So do you think there's enough of those factors being looked at in regards to the condition of the lakes and the lower Murray?
No, look, I don't think so. As I said earlier, it was in the late 1900s when the then government of South Australia decided to turn some of those channels right down and to the ocean, turn them into the ocean to run the water off. The idea was to increase pasture lands, if you like, so that people coming back from war would have somewhere to live and to perhaps farm. That was the general idea. But further down, of course, when you get heading towards Mount Gambier in that whole area down there, limestone country, there's lots of areas and lots of ponds and all sorts of things down there. But to think that the water can get right up into the lower lakes today, I'm afraid it's not so, not as it used to be, nowhere near it. The old drainage, when people look at a map and they see the proper map that's showing the drainage, you'll be amazed how many creeks and goodness knows what and drains are there. But everyone always goes, they think the water's going the wrong way. They think it's coming off the land and going down, you see, but it's not so. The water is coming up, you're quite right. But by the time it gets to Salt Creek and the bottom end of the southern lagoon, it's only a trickle. My wife and I were down there a couple of years ago, and they just put a small bridge down in there, and making the opportunity for a photograph. And I was watching water underneath me. It wasn't very much at all. The creek was no more than probably, I don't know, 20, 25 feet wide, I suppose, and it wouldn't have been any more than a half a metre deep. And it just slowly, gently heading out to the bottom end of the southern lagoon. That's all it was. And as I said before, in that period, it brought a lot of algae off the paddocks, which almost covered the lower southern lagoon and really mucked it up. So most of the water that we're relying on, Bill, in fact, what we get in the catchments throughout the mountains, of course, and from the bigger rivers, the Darling, the Murray, the Goulburn, the Loddon River, further down in Victoria, and so on. Yeah.
And I suppose that's what the federal government people think in regards to, well, we just need to keep from water down there. But with the situation of trying to maintain the lower lakes as fresh water, is there any scope, do you think, from the South Australian people and the South Australian government to look at that in regards to returning the lower lakes to estuarine?
I've been hammering that out for years, and hence the reason in 2014 I started to write that document, A Better Way for the Murray-Darling Basin. I wanted a simple title, and I was going to write it in simple words so that everyone could understand it. And that's the sort of feedback I got. I was pleased about that. But no, the fact is that the water keeps coming down here, but half the time we don't know where it's coming from. The Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder is not always on the mark. I'm not putting them down. They're not a bad bunch of people, but there are times if we had gauges down here and we had a message of where that water's heading, who's it for, or what's it for? Is it for the Murray Mouth, to clear the Murray Mouth and get the silt and whatever out of it? Or is it for the Coorong? And of course, we know the story there. The upper Coorong's fine. That's half the length of the Coorong, if you like, roughly. Supports a great fishery there and so on. It's a very pleasant place to be. The bird life there is extraordinary, but not with the southern lagoon. It's not quite so good, sadly. But having said that, the government, this state government, their call always to send more water down. How many times have we read the same thing? How many times did we pick up a newspaper when it had a red heart on the front cover when you knew darn well there was another story about getting more water down here? And the question always was, where's this water going? No one really knew. You know, they talk about the environment, of course, they'd mention that, but what environment and where? No, this nonsense has got to stop. We just can't keep doing it like we're doing it. And why is that? Because we've been warned about climate change. There's no doubt about it. And look at it now. The guys that said that all those years ago were dead right. Look at it now. We've got thunderclouds over us right now, and they're supposed to be up over Darwin. We got a wet night last night and today. Yeah. And so, you know, the point is, we've only got so much water in the whole system. And I'm talking about from Queensland, of course, down through the Darling and New South Wales and all over rivers. And of course, there's the Murrumbidgee and the Murray and so on. They've only catch so much water, and we're getting less water. Although people might laugh at me saying that now because we've had floods. Yeah, but they've done nothing with the floods. I don't know how many times we've said to people, to governments, for goodness sake, get yourself in gear. We need some more storage while we've got opportunities. But no, never happened. Look at the big drought we got just after Christmas down here. It was horrific. And what was happening is the plume that it brought with it and all the rubbish that was in it, that finished out, a lot of that finished out 7 kilometres off our coast. And let me tell you, way back up in the rivers, Professor Peter Gill and another one of his associates, professor, they were some years ago now asked to check all the rivers in the basin, or as many as they could possibly get to. They wanted to know what sort of damage all of our wonderful rivers are being put upon them. Well, the findings are horrific. They found that there's a wonderful document, and I'll find it later and give you the details. Here it is. I'll give it to you now. If you can scribble this title down, I implore you to do, as long as it is. It's worth it. This is one of Professor Peter Gill's documents, and he and Dr. Michael A. Reid, he was the assistant with Dr. Professor Gill. The document is called Muddied Waters, the case for mitigating sediment and nutrient flux to optimise restoration response in the Murray-Darling Basin. Sorry for the long heading, but it says it all. You can get that, anyone can get that document. If you use that on your World Wide Web, put it in there and you'll get it.
We'll post a link after the show.
What you're going to read in there is going to blow your socks off. They found the damage was throughout the whole system. What was happening is that while we can't deny that flooding is natural, we have to put up with flooding when it happens. But there are other reasons why we had overbank flooding. That seems to be the talk about things today. They love various organisations love to have overbank flooding. And when they do that, of course, onto the floodplains, it picks up very fine sedimentation, very fine. It's so fine, according to Peter Gill's document, that when some of it gets trapped, of course, it's always out there and it evaporates, and that's the end of it. There's still a lot, though, that finds its way into the river with the sedimentation. And what they found, every test that they did, was the sediments were so fine when they got back in the river, they were actually caught up in the upper water column. So you can imagine that, a whole section of river shaded. The sun couldn't get down, the oxygen couldn't get down. The plant life, the vegetation down the bottom's gone in every river. The biota that relies on the vegetation and goodness knows what else. And the other animals, the yabbies, I suppose, the fish, we can go on, there's lots of names. Where do they go? What do they do? Where do they get their feed from? This is the sort of thing that we're looking at right now. Our rivers are disgusting to look at. Even down here in Goolwa, I go there on the wharf occasionally and have a look down. I can see no more down into the water than about a centimetre. That's caused by sedimentation. And until that goes, and the bad part about it is it's not only, killing things up in the river systems. When that water hit the ocean, up to 7 k's out in one part, it's the same thing with the seaweeds and everything else out there. It killed the same sort of stuff for the same reason. Someone has got to come good on this. Someone has got to tap these people on the shoulders and say, for goodness sake, we can't keep doing this. This is unfair. This is our mighty rivers. We rely on these rivers for our water. It's so bad in some areas that it's undrinkable. And yet there are people, as we know, that live along the rivers that rely on that water. No, it's not good enough. Sorry, Bill, I better rest up a bit with you.
No worries. Well, who's to blame for the overflow, and who can remedy it? Because my understanding is, right, if all the river water stays within its bank and flows out, that seems to be fine. Take some, irrigate your crop, but don't let it flow back into the river with all your sediment. That's fine, because anyway, water that seeps into the ground will eventually find its way naturally back to the river, by seepage under the ground. But if it washes into the river, it washes the sediment in. So how much the problem is caused by irrigators, and how much is it caused by not controlling the river better with flood mitigation and water storage, so you can control the flow? Because a lot of people don't seem to understand this. Up here, we've got a situation where we have a wild river policy. So we've got some magnificent river, but for a couple of months of the year, it's a rush of water, a massive rush of water out to sea, and then it can be basically a dry riverbed for another 6 months. That is pointless for the environment. If you look at the advantages of the Ord River, at least they stored all that water in a major holding area. Then they set up a dam further down. So for 55 kilometres, you've got a set level of water that's feeding wetlands and has increased the bird life and the other life in that section. And they still send water off down, of course, to the river mouth now near Dampier. But the thing is, they only take a few % of the total flow for irrigation and the wetlands, so it still gets plenty of flow down to the river mouth.
They're well off down there. They're very lucky. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
quite right.
we could, West Australia could afford to take more water out of that system and and put a pipeline down to Perth if they wanted to. But that's
Okay.
another story.
There
Um,
is I know where you're coming to, and I think what we should do at this point, it's a very good point you make. We should talk about constraints. The MDBA for years has been preaching and writing about constraints happening all the way down both sides of all the rivers. And we've got to remove that bridge, and we've got to shift that post, or that building's in the road, or something like, kid you not, it's that sort of stuff we're talking about. And they want all these constraints removed so they can get more water down. That's what it's all about. And the growers, the irrigators, are absolutely burlesque in what they feel about this. How dare they do this to the river? We know that every time you overflow the river over the banks, the old former Murray-Darling Basin Commission did some work on this. They did some science on this. They studied it. It causes notch erosion, and the river banks collapse into the river. And that's what's happening. No one's listening. And they keep doing it. And they keep preaching. These constraints are going to come out. Believe us, they say. Well, no, surely not. Surely we're not that brainless to think that we're going to wreck the whole thing. It's already partly wrecked, but it's going to get worse if they keep it up.
well, that's what would confuse most lay people in regards to what the process is. You know, most people would be confused in regards to here's a government that's saying we've got to flush more water down the Murray, but we
Yeah.
know, some of us know, that there's choke points in it where you can't get that volume of water anyway, naturally. So you have constant flooding in some areas, and you're basically saying those constant overbank floods are more as damaging as almost no water through the system, sort of
Yes,
thing,
you got it.
because it affects all the environments along the river in regards to that discharge. But where are the politicians getting their information? Because it beggars belief that they can make these arbitrary decisions. They're basically telling regional communities right along the Murray and the Darling in particular that your community can basically go and wither away because you're not going to get your water allocations because we're going to flush it down the river because the river needs it more. But that's not the truth. That is not improving the health of the river. How do we get to a situation where we actually have some KPIs? Because KPIs seem to be a big thing with the government. We've got to have these KPIs in regards to key progress points and that. So what the hell would be some of these initiatives? What would be some of the key points be to show improvement versus degradation?
Well, Bill, I'm with you all the way. And all I can say is we've got to get through to these politicians, and we've got to make sure that they understand what the hell's going on, because it cannot continue. We are destroying the place, or they are. There's a lot of people involved here. This country relies on the Murray-Darling Basin for a third of its food. If we wreck that, well, you know what might happen. There are people looking on. I'm sad to say, but we need our food security. And boy, this is not the way. This is not the way to do it. To remove constraints, amazing. When they started to talk about road bridges and caravan parks and stuff like that with me, I saw red. I thought that they're crazy. They really are. And yet they're willing to go along with it. So first of all, the MDBA should be looked at. Someone should get in there and have a look at exactly what they're doing and have a look at some of their literature. that's for sure. Yeah, pick up the constraints books for a start, and there is heaps of them. Yeah.
The other thing is too, do you think is the fact that historically we used to have departments for the environment or for regional development and sort of agriculture and all that primary industries, and we used to have these stations out in the countryside that used to monitor all these sorts of things and collect expertise. And it's not just rivers, it's forests, grazing land, but they were staffed by people. Obviously, a lot of them, of course, were university trained, but they had that field experience. They lived out in the regions and the communities that they were dealing with. They gave advice to the politicians, and you could say it's pretty trustworthy. And the other thing, but today we have a centralised system within the state and federal government where we have a bureaucracy that's probably staffed with people who have never lived out in these areas and making their judgment calls either on what they've learnt in books and at the universities rather than field experience. And then the other problem we have is these bureaucracies have been overloaded with people with an agenda from the environmental lobbies. In Queensland, we had the situation in 2017, the environment minister, she was a first term elected, and she's made the environment minister, and her chief of staff was a guy called Nick Heath, and he came directly from WWF. He was the chairman of WWF for a while and the Australian Conservation Society, and he came in as the chief of staff. And you can bet others have come in. Now, Nick Heath's gone and moved on to the Premier's office, and there's another person now in the seat with as the chief of staff of the environment, and he's come in from the same pathway. If we've got a bureaucracy that is overloaded with these type of people, what chance have we got of changing the situation?
Not much. Not much. That's the problem. I've been fighting it here. I'm not the only one, mind you. There are many around me, many that have helped and so on. But the governments, they refuse. I mean, I've got a paper here, if I can find it in a minute, just while we're talking. Just a quick message from Susan Close, who's our water minister here in South Australia. She was formerly with Education. I'd let you to make up your mind about that. But I'm afraid they don't listen. It's send more water down. It's always like that. Send more water down, no matter. We need that water, yeah. And yet they seem to think it's not, the water will never run out. And the fact of the matter is we know it has run out many times.
But even if you get more water, it still doesn't necessarily do any good. Actually, I'll just show, and the other thing is we've got to start weighing the importance of different things, because all right, where you are in South Australia, you've got an interest in the lower lakes and how they're performing, and it's not just for fishing, it's also amenity and things like that. And then you also got people in the lower Murray in South Australia, and even off the Lake Alexandrina that need irrigation and water from that system. And then you've got to weigh it up against the thousands of people, or the hundreds of thousands of people on this river system themselves, not just the irrigators, but all the communities who depend on them for a livelihood that's affected. So how do we get a reasonable outcome for everyone if we don't sort of address or identify every problem and then see what's can be done reasonably to address it? But we don't even seem to have that interest in regards to identifying the issues and then essentially address one by one and make compromises of like everything. When there's a number of parties involved, sometimes there's compromise, but we don't seem to have that. We seem just more water and that's it.
Well, well, that's what's happening. But the trouble is to get people people, ordinary people in the streets, for goodness sake, they rely on it just as much as anyone else. Why can't we get more people to say to their politicians, you guys have got a lot to answer for? It's time. It really is time. If we waste it like we've been wasting it before, well, heaven forbid. I can only suggest to people that you know, get serious about this, because it is a serious matter, and it's not going to get any better, not for anyone. Here we
But
go.
also,
This is. I'm going to read a little bit of this. I'll just see if I can show you a little bit up there. If I can, where's my camera? There it is.
Yep.
You can see.
quotes
Yep. Susan Close is
Susan
the.
Close MP. Yep.
Yep.
I got that.
She's. This is. And it says, quotes, attributable to Susan Close MP. Now, she's our water minister in South Australia, and she's also the Deputy Premier. She says, while the floods provided ecological lifeline to the Coorong and the lower lakes, forecasts now indicate we are poised for a drier period in the foreseeable future. Well, that's not a bad start, but then let's see where it goes. Ideally, she said, the mouth of our country's biggest river should not need to be dredged continuously to keep it open. Well, that's the first mistake she's made. Then she says, this is just another expense caused by the failure of upstream states to ensure enough water flows down the system to ensure the health of the whole river system. She doesn't stop at that. She says, this is why it is so fundamental that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, including the 450 gigalitres of environmental flows, is delivered in full. That's what she said. Now you can see that's what we're up against.
You had the same rhetoric from Sarah Hanson-Young.
Yes, we did. She's from the same state.
Saying, yeah, talking about the same situation. But just going on to the Murray Mouth, I'll just put up a screen share. I mean, this is part of the Lake Alexandria down the bottom. And this down here where my arrow is, is the mouth of the Murray.
Correct.
Good grief. Nothing's got to flow through there too much. I've seen a lot of I've seen some papers suggesting that this Murdo Island and part of Long Island probably block a good part of that, the flow in and out. So this thing's got to, the Murray Mouth is always going to choke up when it's that small anyway.
Well, if you read My Better Way, that's one of the reasons I wrote about it, because My Better Way deals with that, and it deals with it. Through the Mundu channel. Sorry, I touched the screen and I shouldn't have. But yes, the Mundu channel, which is almost opposite the Murray Mouth.
I'll just check it up again.
We'll get you back. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yes, you'll see the Murray Mouth there. Yeah, there's Mundu Island. Now, just towards the Murray Mouth, you'll see that stream scooting all over the place that finishes up in Lake Alexandrina, which is at the top. That's it. If you follow that, where the Murray Mouth lookout. Oh, okay. That's
the whole lake.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you can see how big the Murray Mouth is. It's not very big at all, but that looks like a creek behind it that curls around a little bit. There's a barrage in there. It's called the Mundu Barrage, and it's connected to Mundu Island and to the bigger High Marsh Island. And that's the closest barrage to the Murray Mouth, and it's opposite. Now, one of the things is that, as you can see, the water coming down through the Goolwa Barrage from Goolwa town, you can see there, the barrage is there, it's about halfway there. It's hard to pick out, but it's there. That's the first barrage, that's the Goolwa Barrage. And then if you come the other way, you've got all the other barrages well down in the Coorong. They've got a fair way down before they get anywhere. All of those, none of them are dead on front of the Murray Mouth. The only channel at all that faces the Murray Mouth is the Mundu Channel. So in my A Better Way, I've said the Mundu Channel needs some work. Before the Mundu barrage was built, at the neck of that Mundu, what we call it the Mundu Creek, just for now. At where it joined in with the Coorong, there was a little sandbar there. It was no bigger than a kitchen table, and I've actually got the plans or the maps in that period before anything was built down there, and it shows that little tiny sand in the middle of that little creek, right opposite the Murray Mouth. As a consequence, Lake Alexandrina on the other end of it, of course, can't get through there to clear the Murray Mouth. That's where all the problems are. So what I've said is we'll build or clear out that whole Mundu Creek because it's silted up. That little table size sand hill that was in the middle of that waterway is now at least 2 hectares. It grew huge. It's even got vegetation on the top of it, but it's not unrealistic to move it. We can get heavy machinery in there through the islands and the bridges we got down in Goolwa to move and unblock that whole system so that Lake Alexandrina water can go straight to the Murray Mouth and clear it. But anyway, you'll read that all about that in my A Better Way document. It's up towards the end of the story.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about it is, even though the Murray River is a mighty river and lots of flows in flooding and that, gee, the Murray, Lower Murray isn't exactly the Mississippi, is it?
No, no, it's not.
It's still up near Wellington, that and further on. It looks pretty anemic at the best.
Well, it's interesting. You might find it interesting, at least, that the Murray Mouth and straight up to where the River Murray comes into Lake Alexandrina, that's 45 kilometres away. That's how wide it is. Yeah. That's, go on.
The other thing is too, is I read a bit on your paper about the acidification that's in Lake Alexandrina.
Yep.
And we can't, although the fresh water sort of mitigates the mobilisation of that acid base, it all falls apart when there's a drought and there's not enough coverage of the silty bottom. But you're suggesting that the bottom point of the lake could be as low, far down as 40 feet below the current bed, because it's all just silt and other sort of vegetation or inflows that has basically got a acidic base.
Well, you see, the lakes themselves are shallow. There's no doubt about it, and there's no doubt about it that we lose so much through evaporation. In a normal year, we're losing just under 900 gigalitres of water evaporation from the big lake. A gigalitre, by the way, in case there's anyone that is watching this is unsure of a gigalitre. A gigalitre is a square kilometre by a metre deep. So we have 2018 gigalitres of water in the lower lakes. And as I say, the evaporation rates, they can knock up anything up to 900 gigs in a year. In the millennium drought, jointly, the two lakes, we lost around about, by memory, 1,015 gigalitres of water. That's a lot of water. And it's interesting, perhaps, for a lot of people, that if you had to buy that water, and it's all river water, and when it's in good nick, it's probably one of the best, that will cost you over 14 billion. Make sure you got the B on the front, billion. That's how much that water's worth. And here it is. We know that we've got some growers that use water in the lower lakes. And a few years ago, I did a little bit of an exercise with the department, and I've got a paper here I want to show you. I'll just dig it out in a sec. But I said to the department, what I'm looking for is for you to tell me how many licensed growers are using Lower Lakes water, and how much water did they use in the year 2019, 2020. So they got back to me. It took them 3 months to get all those figures. This is the paper. I just want you to see it because it's a single paper.
Single page.
Okay.
Yep.
This piece of paper is so valuable when it comes to bark. Lo and behold, when they wrote back to me, they said that they'd had to do a lot of work, and they did a lot of analysis in a 750-kilometre radius around the Lower Lakes to get all the answers. And we know that the Lower Lakes hold 2,018 megalitres of water. So how much of that water did they use? There was 166 growers combined together, all of them together, only used 21 gigalitres. 21 out of 2080. You have to say to yourself, where's the rest of that water going? We have no gauges. I've mentioned it before. No decent gauges that we can say we know it went there. No, it's unfair, grossly unfair.
So can we make Lake Alexandrina estuarine and still supply water via channel to these growers in the future or something like that?
We certainly can. We certainly can. And that's what A Better Way tells you about. It gives you the full story from go to woe. And the fact that the former Murray-Darling Basin Commissioner was nice enough to tell me that what I've got was absolutely accurate. I was rather pleased about that. And yes, we can. And that's what I've been fighting for. We can't keep using water like that and evaporates. It gets away. Even the old commission, I must admit, back in Peter Millington's day, they did some work on evaporation along the rivers. They found in an ordinary year, the rivers were losing 60% to evaporation. So if you put that evaporation together with what's in the lower lakes, that's one heck of a lot of water. So we had a lot to learn. Other people have got a lot to learn too. We've got a long way to go. And
but the other thing is too, estuarine areas are very, very productive areas in a normal situation. And if you go to any estuarine thing, like I lived in Perth and we had the Swan River.
I love it over there.
There's no attempt to sort of control the flow in and out of the bloody river.
Exactly.
We can still sail our yachts around Perth, around the Canning River and across.
Did you do the Peel Harvey area?
Yeah, well, that's another interesting area. That's got a similar issue to the Coorong in regards to it has a great big sandbar running along the extensive coast, and the Peel Inlet runs up towards Mandurah and then goes into the Peel River inland. But the Coorong, the structures like the Coorong are not unique. They're spotted all over the Australian coastline. You go down to around Esperance, you go around to around Sale area and Barnsdale area.
That's right.
To the lakes there, got the same sort of system. You've got a huge inland water flow, and it's blocked by a sandbar basically, and then it finds its way out to one exit channel. And there's more up the east coast. It's not as though we're dealing with something that's so unique, so strange, or whatever.
No,
we don't have a good grip, or we can't get a good grip on how it's formed and what makes it healthy and what makes it productive. But we seem to have lost that conversation in South Australia. So who we can't have the situation where New South Wales and Victoria people in the regional communities feel aggrieved that their communities are being sacrificed just so you can flush more water down there for no visible gains or no result, basically. So how do we get people to make the politicians take notice? Do we just have to and this is one of the biggest issues I've got with a lot of groups of people. One of the first, when they get active and upset about something in a community, the first thing they say is, we're apolitical. Now, as soon as you say you're apolitical, you pose no threat to the government, you pose no advantage to the opposition or any other party. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes of community groups who have got a genuine and valid reason for grievance. They need to say, well, no, we are going to act political. We are going to impose some retribution on the people imposing this. But while you continue to say you're apolitical, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to pose a threat to politicians before they act.
Yes, well, they got a long way, I'm afraid. You know, there's something else I should raise, you know, right now with it boils away in there. I talked about constraints earlier. One of the problems has been, and we've got it now with the federal water minister, so it seems, they're watering the forests, for goodness sake. The forests that are right on the edge of rivers, the big ones I'm talking about. And they keep watering them. Forests are no different to any other tree anywhere else. They'll get foot rot. If you keep doing that, the trees will die. And that's what they're finding upstream already. They've got it all wrong. They're worried about the tree, as I said, on the hill with the shrub alongside it, for goodness sake. Get real. Yeah. Forests certainly need a drink. Of course they do. But they need to have dry feet too. They need it, that period. And some of them will need up to 12 months dry feet. Otherwise they'll get foot rot. And that's the end of it.
Well, I think that's where the red gums are suffering, and that from overly regular bank overflow. But is it just too easy for people like Plibersek and politicians and that to just say the word environment and basically win over the ignorant public? Is that the problem?
Well, yes, as soon as the word environment's used all the time. It's used probably more than anything else. And that's the problem. And, well, we know what happened, you know, in the parliament in Canberra in recent weeks, and the big changes. And here it is, those that are more attuned to the green side of things have got their way. This is not going to do this basin any good at all. In fact, it'll help to destroy it.
And it won't really do anything for the lakes.
Exactly. And here it is, we're going to put up with more hot weather, apparently. And, you know, heaven forbid, it's raining down here at the moment, but it'll have to hurry up if it's coming. But I have no doubt with these people. They know what they're doing. They're weather people. They're the best we can find, and you know, we have to listen. This is what we need. We need people to listen. I'm sorry, the political side is just a mess. It really is a mess, and it doesn't matter which party you look at. None of them have got much in the way of faith in what we're talking about here. And sadly, I would have hoped early in the piece that the federal water minister would have been a lot better than what she has been. I would have also thought that maybe the Prime Minister might have picked up the reins for a while and had a decent look at this. I think he should. It's more than my power to even encourage him out the front gate, but I think he needs to do something.
Well, just looking at it from Queensland's perspective with the environment weaponisation against regional Queensland, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Vegetation Act or the Great Barrier Reef Protection Act, it's getting to a stage where they're basically seemingly every time the UNESCO comes up with something that we're enacting it, we're looking down the barrel now of a readjustment of the protection for the Great Barrier Reef and the regulations and what's worse, the actual enforcement of these regulations that are going to come on. And it's to satisfy our responsibility to UNESCO for the Great Barrier Reef, which is a pile of, is garbage. The reef can look after itself.
It's that sedimentation, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, well, even that we know from work, Peter Redd's work. In 8 hours, the flow from north to south of the Pacific currents flush more water through the Great Barrier Reef than it comes out in a year from the northern rivers. And every 16 days, the water from the top of the reef to the bottom of the reef is completely changed over.
Yeah.
There's a new flow. So it's bad science, bad quality control, and this is what we've got on in your area on the Murray-Darling Basin and on the lower lakes. We have bad science and poor politicians who just set the narrative that's dished up by the current sway of bureaucrats.
When the new pollies come in, have you ever thought about the fact that on their first day, probably the chief of their department will take them out to lunch and, and hand them a blue case. That's usually the thing. And then a bunch of papers, obviously, sometimes with a lot of dust on them. And those papers continually are handed over. It's the same sort of stuff. Nothing changes except the face. And that's what's happening. We're getting the same sort of rubbish year after year, and that's certainly showing up in the basin right now. Absolutely. It's sad, Bill, no doubt about it. Let me read you, just give you a break for a sec.
Yep.
Let me show you that. That's a little bit down in the southeast drainage. There's a picture there, in the corner. See that kangaroo?
Yep.
I'm going to tell you about that. This is down in the southeast drainage, and this poor kangaroo, he's gone, of course. This kangaroo died a few metres from a fauna ramp water drained from acid sulphate soils that had ponded behind one of the many blockages of wind-blown and water-eroded sand. It was either poisoned or got stuck and drowned in the stinking, deep, sticky monosulfidic black ooze. Yes, that's what we've got. Did you know that the lower lakes combined have over 500 million tonnes of it underneath those lakes? And during the millennium drought, my science colleague here in Gore, Ian Rowan, and I were testing places like Currency Creek, which is just over the road here. We were measuring the acid out there. We were measuring it at pH 2, pH 2.5 sometimes.
Put it in your battery.
It's more than your car batteries. That is stronger. And it was everywhere, no matter where you went in the lower lakes. And then one day I got a phone call from France. And I thought, oh, this is unusual. Someone's ringing me from Paris. It was a film company, France 2, and this guy I spoke to, he spoke good English, and he said, Ken, we're keen to come down because of the Copenhagen conference back then. we have to make a film on drought, and your country and your state in particular has been chosen as one of those countries. So what can you do to help us? And I said, well, come down by all means. I think you won't be surprised. It's all there. And that's all right. It was a few nights before they left, of course. And then about 2 nights later, he rang me again. He said, oh, I forgot one thing. He said, how many 4-wheel drives do we want? I said, none. He said, what do you mean, none? He said, how do we get across the lakes and that? I said, no, you put 1 foot in the lakes and you're a goner. What I do, we have access to a series of hovercraft down here, and that we can get one of those that carries 4 of us, including me. And they came down, they filmed, and that film was shown in Copenhagen of what we had in the lower lakes. It was breathtaking, according to a lot of people. They couldn't believe what they were looking at. It's going to be in a mess again. It could well be. We just don't know when, but I don't think it's far off, and a lot of people share that idea too. And we try and we do everything we possibly can. I mean, even get down to the birds. I mentioned the birds a moment ago. I should tell you about this. I'll just get it. Think I can. If I can. You see those birds?
Yep.
Yep. They're all cormorants.
Yep.
Now, throughout the basin there and the School Channel and so on, down to the barrages, there's a series of poles in the water that have got electronics in them that actually measure ECU levels. That's salinity levels, in other words. And so over the years, my colleague and I have collected literally hundreds of the readings of these podcasts. We can tell exactly what the salinity levels are down here in the lakes. They're supposed to be held at around about 800, which is drinking water, of course, EC. But the government set, I think it was 1,000. You can't creep over that. I can tell you that most of it down there or out there goes up into the 50 and 60,000 EC. Yeah, it's a mess.
You wouldn't want to water your garden with that.
It's a mess. Now, mind you, before we even pump up our computers and look at the latest pod readings and so on all of that, the birds tell us. Those birds in there, they know. They're from the ocean, which is just over the sandhills down here. They know when the sea comes in here. It's got through the barrages, of course, and it's found its way right up into Wellington sometimes, and even higher. Yeah, they tell us, they let us know. They don't bluff us. They don't tell lies. Yeah.
So we've got a problem. We've got acidic base in there, and then we've got salt water coming in. So at times, you're talking about another drought coming. Well, we're not going to have the fresh water to keep the lower lakes fresh by artificially feeding more in from New South Wales and Victoria, because it won't. At times, it won't be there anyway.
That's right.
So, can we make a case to just get the lower lakes back to estuarine and just somehow control the level, but get salt water in there, get the mower back, get a productive estuarine system back? But no one seems to have a grip on that. This would be a good thing.
People that have got my Better Way document know the answer, and the governments have got one. Yeah, of course they got it, but they don't talk about it. They don't want to talk about it.
Well, can you just give us a bit of overview of what's your view that should happen with the lower lakes that would provide a constant good environment rather than trying to manage some artificial environment by
You hit the nail on the head. You're right, Bill. You're right there. The lower lakes, 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 the lower lak the lower lakes back to an estuary like they were before is one of absolute productivity. The fishery, for a start, will become, with the mulloway and many other species, of course, has the opportunity to become one of the biggest in Australia. This is the biggest inshore fishery I'm talking about. That's there. It's proven. The mulloway is still coming in, but they can't get in. They come to the walls, and that's the end of it. Yeah. We need to convince people that. I mean, let's look at this acid problem. In your own turf,
Trinity Inlet.
what happened there? We use that as the example down here all the time. You guys taught us a lot about how it was treated, and we were thrilled. We said to them when the acid was flowing down here, to let a little bit of the ocean. Oh no, we can't do that. It'll make it worse. So they said they did some testing, and I saw 2 little tanks up on a hill there, and they were mucking around with it, but I don't think they come up with anything that was passable when it came to it. But no, they just kept on with it. They said, no, we've got to be, they said, we've got to be seen to be doing something. That's what one of the scientists said to me. They had aircraft brought in to put out crushed limestone that was hauled up from Robe in the southeast. It cost thousands. We had, I forget how many thousands of tons, but it was a lot of crushed stuff to put over these terrible acidic places that were very dangerous. It was so dangerous, in fact, in the Goolwa Channel, just opposite here where I live. We get a lot of wind down here. Goolwa is known as a windy place. In the dry areas of that channel, and it was only about a third its width then, the wind was picking up the silt and the sand and everything else so badly that people were going to the doctors. So Ian Rowan, scientists, and myself decided to take it upon ourselves and ring EPA up in Adelaide and get them down here, and to bring 2 of their air analyzers, if I can put it that way, to check the air and see what was in it. Sure enough, when they came, they said, you're quite right. The granulations, if you like, have got acid in them. There were even people further up in the Finnis River. There are several rivers, by the way, and creeks that finish up in Lake Alexandrina, quite a few of them. In fact, altogether, when they're all in harmony, they can produce up to 9 gigalitres of water a year. But yeah, there was a person up there that had a brand new corrugated house, and the acid was on the tin, and it was starting to treat the tin. Unbelievable. That's how dangerous it was. Yeah. So where's it all come from? Well, it comes from a place called Bracunga. Bracunga is in the Mount Lofty Ranges. There's a little township called Nairn. You'll find that on the map easy enough. Just a little bit out from Bracunga. From Nairn was this Bracunga mine. And that's been going for some years now. It was, I think it was, it stopped production in something like in 1972. But in the meantime, of course, it'd been digging up pyrites to help with the phosphates. It was something to do with superphosphate fertilizer, and it had to have the pyrites ingredient in it. But it was that ingredient that actually got into some of the creeks, including the Dorsley Creek, a tributary of the Bremer River, which is a fairly big creek river, if you like. And Langhorns Creek, of course, that's where the wine growers are here. Wow, it got close to their wine. And lo and behold, it was found through those creeks and so on, it was found to be flowing into Lake Alexandrina. And it's been doing that for thousands of years. And no doubt about it, now it's disturbed, of course, and it's found in the Mount Lofty Ranges from well north of Adelaide to Kangaroo Island. And there are several mines all the way through there, or there were, that were using those mines for this pyrites. Yes, it's a mess. It's a big mess.
Okay, look, we've gone well over time.
I thought
What
we
we might
had.
do is come back sometime early next year and just have a sort of real strong wrap up in regards to the solutions for the lower lakes and how we can get people on board with it. And then hopefully that will, from what we've already spoken about, we basically get the impression that more water down the Murray is not going to be the solution.
No.
Hopefully we can convince people, well, you can't maintain the artificial situation you got in the lower lakes, and we have to address that and be prepared to accept good scientific information in regards to the benefits of returning it to an estuarine system. And by the same token, we have to also ensure that we can keep the levels up in the lake even when it's tidal, to make sure none of the communities are hurt for access to amenity of the lakes.
Quite right, Bill. And you, of course, you've heard me mention Professor Peter Gill before, from University in Ballarat, Victoria, a great Australian, who has said all along that the lower lakes were always estuarine, and his data proved it. And not only that, anyone can prove it for themselves. If you get a boat and go up the river from down here, or up from a little bit further up, perhaps Murray Bridge, if you get on the Murray Bridge and then up to where the cliffs are, you'll find marine animals everywhere in the cliffs. You'll find right up at the border, you'll find shells from mollusks up there that were marine. It's definitely been that, and Peter's been served up a bad serve, I'm afraid. I stuck with Peter right through that and watched every moment and every minute and every word. And thankfully, he and Professor Max Finlayson, the former Ramsar representative for Australia, have just finished a book, and it's called Ramsar, and there's 2 words to it, but Ramsar is the beginning of it anyway. And everyone should look out for that book. Hopefully in the new year, I'll give you the full data on that book, so that people
It would be good if we could have a show to coincide with the release of that publication. But if that's a bit far off, I think we should return probably in February or March next year and have another conversation. But I'd really like to thank you for your time tonight. It's really been appreciated, and it's fairly insightful to have someone from across the border in South Australia talking to us and giving their views, and seeing someone who's not so hard-headed as this Victoria and New South Wales, send us more water or else.
Well, that's right. They put up with all of this, and I can't blame them for grizzling on it a bit. But yeah, people are in the Goulburn area, the Goulburn Rivers, and the Loddon, and of course the Murray in particular. Yeah, we can't waste this water. It's too expensive. We cannot think that we're not going to grow our own food. We'd be in trouble if we do. And just keep an eye at the supermarkets now, because you will see the prices go up. And that's a result of our growers right now can't get enough water because the federal minister wants it for the environment.
Okay then, Ken, look, we'll leave it there, but if you just stay on the line, we'll just do an outgoing and introduce next week. Well, actually next Wednesday's show. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's certainly a pleasure, and I'm pleased to do it again if you want it.
Certainly will. If you enjoyed today's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Join me again on Wednesday, and I'll be speaking to Scott Hargrave. Scott is the Executive Director of Institute of Public Affairs, and we'll be discussing the events of the Alliance for Responsible Citizens Conference in London, and whether we can actually get these think tanks to actually produce action heroes for us to actually get things done for the regions. So please join me on Wednesday evening. Thank you.